So I think the important thing was that how we worked together in this, and the unions plus women's groups, plus there were a lot of students, and American students who were lining up in fact. So it was very, I think, an initiative that paid well, I would say. And I think the important thing was that the system, a certain system has been set up. So after this Rana Plaza accident, where there's been other accidents, but smaller ones, again the same sort of strategy has been used, and it's to establish liability in the labor situation, which is very important, particularly between the market and the labor groups. That was one example. The other example I would like to talk about is the social controls on women's lives, particularly everybody's going through this Islamophobia. I don't want you to go through that just because of what I say, but socially there's been a tradition or whatever it is of imams, Muslim imams issuing these fatwas, and particularly indicting women for whatever moral behavior, and usually it's followed up by penalties of different social penalties or even physical penalties. And it may have been a tradition, but I don't think it's been very common in recent years. But anyway, in 1993, we read in the newspaper, the national newspaper in Dhaka, that in some remote village up north, some woman had been penalized. The man had indicted her by issuing a fatwa saying that you've been guilty of something or the other, of remarrying after the first divorce, and therefore you're held guilty. And one of the men around there then said, if I were you, I'd be so ashamed I'd commit suicide, which is exactly what she did. She went home and ate rat poison, and she died. And this, of course, caught the public eye thanks to the media. So then we all rushed out there and we took up the legal case. And this is important because, again, we were able to use a legal space to establish certain rights for women, because subsequently, this was only one incident, and the lawyers took up the case through different courts, the lower courts and senior courts and so on, until the man was finally convicted. But what was interesting was that, or what helped the women's movement to carry this forward, was that subsequent to this incident, let's just 2 or 3 months later, there was another similar incident somewhere else in Bangladesh, and a few months later another incident somewhere. And then we kept following it up, so one would be reading about these incidents in different villages, incidents that would not normally have caught our eye, but because we are onto this sort of hunt, as it were. So we pursued it, but not only through the law, of course, through different courts, each time trying to get whatever judgment we could get, until we finally reached the High Court and the Senior Court, and it was through a process. And then we were put in sort of in a conflict situation, because on the other hand, the imams filed rival case saying that this is my freedom of right of speech, why can't I indict people by giving fatwa, and this is what Islam says, and so on. Of course, we all know that Islam doesn't really say it quite like that. But finally, I think it was in about 20 years later, 2004, that we finally got a final judgment from the Supreme Court declaring that fatwas because in fatwa, if you translate the word, it is merely an opinion. It can be an opinion on the law, but if you are a learned person, learned in Islamic law. But in this case, of course, there were ordinary village people issuing these fatwas. So, but what the Supreme Court then said was that that fatwas which issue any orders for penalties, physical or otherwise, are illegal, and decisions of the court are final, and it cannot be left to religious leaders to issue such thing. I mean, you can give, a religious leader can say something, but it can only be an opinion. It cannot be binding on anybody. And this, for the first time, again, we were able to use a legal space to be able to assert a woman's right to the right of the imam and what he called his freedom of speech. I think, again, here I would say that while we were able to use the legal space to get so far, what happened was that, as usual, it's sort of bureaucratic corruption or bureaucratic laziness or whatever it was. The police seemed very reluctant to act. So again, it was women's groups who went around taking up this court judgment, printing it out, circulating the judgment to everybody, all the police stations and so on, and seeing to it and monitoring that, this was not done. Of course, we also had the help of the UN CEDAW committee, because just at that time, the UN CEDAW committee was sitting in on Bangladesh government's report, and we were able to send them a shadow report to be able to read the two together, at which point they obviously raised these questions with the government representative. So finally, several years later, we find that, if perchance such a fatwa is issued, then the person can be taken to court, and he is in fact taken to court. As a result, there have been fewer incidents of such things. And I just pointed out these two examples because I feel that one has to look at the different spaces that are available. Obviously, what has happened in South Asia is not the same as what happens in Europe. But I think in South Asia itself, what is a matter of alarm, and I don't know, Devaki, where we intend to go from there, is the rising trend towards communal politics, both in places like India and Bangladesh, and this if you're in India, it's anti-Muslim or anti-Christian. If you're in Bangladesh, it's anti-Hindu. And this is also the recent thing which is happening from Myanmar, the eviction of people, the Rohingyas from there to here. Apart from whatever is happening to the people who have come, because they really have nowhere to go now. Apart from that, this tendency towards blaming the other, if you're a Buddhist, then you've done it to me in your country, so I will do it to you in my country. There's other businesses.
And there's a sort of populist and neo-nationalist
That's right. So that's a question of alarm, and I think that is something that feminists in these countries need to
Thank you very much. So we've had Barbara reminding us about resistance and agency, and in a way listening to the people involved and not trying to be too automatically prescriptive from the centre. That I thought was very powerful. And your point about building coalitions and using the law. And I just have one small question, and then I'm going to invite, I don't know who wants to speak
one point
next.
of information to ask just before
Yes,
that.
me, I have as well. So you go ahead.
No, I'm not speaking about what I'm speaking.
Yeah.
Isn't it also true that the government reacted so fast on the garment workers thing? You were there when I had that interview with the man. 80% of Bangladesh's revenue comes from the garment industry. That's one of the things that have to be underlined. Why did the government take action immediately to protect those workers and those factories and change all the laws? Because their bloody revenue came from those shops. So that link has to be made when we talk of an example. Because I think 80 to 90% of Bangladesh's tax revenue came from the garment sweatshops that were happening there.
But that's why they respond to the owners, not to the, because there's a endless labor supply, so they don't need to.
Can I ask another just small point about who funded the legal cases? I mean, was that, how did you manage to take it through the law? Because we had a discussion earlier about the problem of actually, getting access and paying for it.
Actually, the lawyers,
pro bono or was
the lawyers did pro bono work, but the organizations, legal aid organizations get funding, so they used it to travel up and down.
Well, that's a very important point to make, because legal aid has been cut so badly in Britain and Europe generally. Okay, who would like to? Diane, would you like to go next, or Devaki?
Devaki's hands on this. And you have the last word. Okay. I think it's been a very fascinating workshop, and so I just want to pull out a few points. First, about where do we go from here? Barbara, it depends on who the we are and where we're starting from. Because I think one of the things that you have to bear in mind is when we're thinking about gender inequality, we are starting in different parts of the world from different positions, so it needs to be rooted in that, where we're starting from and who the we is. So I wanted just to say perhaps what I'm taking away from this is the importance of starting off wherever we are from the position of the poorest and most disadvantaged women. When we're thinking about how do we want to secure gender justice or reduce gender inequality, that I think that's where we need to start from, in a way that Hamida and Barbara's presentations were starting off with and indeed like as yesterday, what's the position of the poorest and most disadvantaged. So in the UK context, I say, for instance, when we try to roll back the austerity policies, hopefully, move forward, well, they ought to be starting from, what about the position of those lone mothers? What about the position of those low-income Asian women that we showed were the worst affected, rather than let's abolish fees for students? So I think in terms of prioritization of steps forward, I'd be arguing for starting from the position of the poorest and most disadvantaged women. In doing that, there will also be benefits for some of the poorest and most disadvantaged men as well, but bearing in mind that women experience poverty and disadvantage differently from men, there'd also need to be some differentiated strategies there. And then I think that the issue of collective agency that's come out in quite a few of our discussions, and very forcefully in what Barbara and Hamida said, is really important. So the way in which we can support the organisations of poor and low-income women, and their ability to link with other organisations, and their ability to have middle-class activists in NGOs listening to them and taking up their issues. So I get very bored with empowerment language, and if the colleagues at Oxfam could find a way to move beyond empowerment, that would be really important. You say empowerment, I say exploitation in many situations. So this issue of can we have more focus on collective agency of poor and disadvantaged women, and how can we support that collective agency? Good jobs is one way of doing that, and when you're in bad jobs, support for ways of struggling against that is another one. And I think that would actually fit in okay with some aspects of the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, with its emphasis on no one left behind, and the human rights prescription of attention to the most disadvantaged first. And it might help us think about that issue of addressing gender inequality, not in terms of